Today is early February 6th, 2023. I want to talk about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. I'm going to start, as always, with liveuamap.com. This is a pro-Ukrainian live map. We take a look. Red is Russian-held territory. Again, this line right here, this is the Dnieper River, and it serves as a natural barrier, a defense line for Russia's western flank. Across Zaporozhye, there had been some indication of Russia pushing forward. There is indicated on the map here, Russian forces have moved toward Vuhledar. I will talk about that in just a moment. And of course, around Bakhmut, these red rifle icons indicates ongoing fighting, and we can see the fighting is even taking place outside of territory held firmly by Russian forces. You can see that they have cut this road, they have taken Soledar, they're moving on Krasna Gora. We also see these rifles, and depending on when you check the map, we see rifles quite far beyond the red Russian-held territory, moving in the direction toward Kupiansk. And so Ukrainian forces are under pressure almost along the entire line of contact. And we have articles like this from Reuters that says Ukraine's situation at the front is getting tougher, Zelensky says. And the article says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday that the situation on the front lines in the east of the country was getting tougher and Russia was throwing more and more troops into battle. It is very difficult now in Bakhmut, Vuhledar, Lyman, and other directions, he continued. So pretty much everywhere. And then the article claims Russia's independent news outlet, Meduza, is not independent, it is funded by the US government, reported in late January that some 40,000 of the 50,000 recruits by the powerful Wagner private military group involved in the campaign there were either dead or missing. 40,000 out of 50,000. Reuters was not able to independently verify the report. Of course not, because it is a baseless claim completely unmoored from reality. You have to remember that even the Western media, Financial Times article a couple of weeks ago said that Ukraine was outgunned in Bakhmut 6-1 by Russian forces. I've talked about a pro-Ukrainian Western volunteer on the ground in Bakhmut who talked about how Russian forces, Wagner forces, were simply outfighting the Ukrainians. They had better equipment, they were better organized, and they were outfighting the Ukrainians. He also specifically said they were taking far fewer losses than Ukraine. So if they've lost 40,000 out of 50,000 recruits, what does that say about Ukrainian losses? So we have to be on the lookout for these absurd claims regarding Russian losses. Do they break it down? Do they explain it in any sort of logical way? Or is this just hyperbole because they have this need to distract people from what's actually really going on? As conditions on the ground deteriorate for Ukrainian forces, we keep hearing about more and more announcements of weapons being pledged, but the nature of these pledges is beginning to shift. And I'll explain that as I break down this next security assistance package. This is dated February 3rd, 2023. And as you can see, there is a list here. This shorter list of equipment they will transfer to Ukraine more or less immediately. And then this Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative. These are all contracts for equipment that arms manufacturers are going to have to build and then send to Ukraine. This doesn't exist yet. They have to build it and then send to Ukraine. And what this list is telling us is that more and more equipment pledged by the United States is falling under this second category of non-existent weapons that still need to be built, because what they have available or what they are willing to make available for Ukraine is dwindling, diminished, more or less. So let's take a look at the list itself. So number one, additional ammunition for high mobility artillery rocket systems. So these are the guided rockets for HIMARS. They never give a number because they have had a shortage this entire time. They have burned through a large number of these rockets. No one's really sure how many they have left, but it's obvious they're running low. There are articles that I've covered in the past from the Western media saying this. What's interesting is the next item, additional 155 millimeter artillery rounds. Now, if you've been following my updates and watching my coverage of these packages as they come out, you will know that they always associate a number with the 155 millimeter artillery rounds. This is, I believe, the first time I have seen no amount, no quantity associated with the announcement of more artillery rounds. And this is another item that they are facing a really serious shortage. They're not giving a number because it's a very small amount that they're transferring to Ukraine, an embarrassingly small number, I would say. Next on the list is additional 120 millimeter mortar rounds. Again, no quantity. In the past, they've given quantities. 190 heavy machine guns with thermal imagery sights and associated ammunition to counter unmanned aerial systems. I suppose this is for the Garan 2 drones, which I haven't actually heard anything about relatively recently. But just remember how big Ukraine is and how much sky it has to cover. Is 190 machine guns going to provide protection for Ukraine's skies? It's better than nothing, but I think just barely. 181 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, or MRAP, and these are just up-armored trucks. That's all they are, and they can protect against some kinds of small arms, and everything else can punch holes through the vehicle and kill everybody inside. Tank fire, anti-tank, guided missiles, RPGs, the guns on armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles will shred these to pieces. And they have been, and this is why they're sending 181 more. This isn't even going to cover what they've lost. Next on the list, 250 Javelin anti-armor systems. 250. They had been sending these in tranches in the thousands. Now 250. Again, this is another weapon system that they have run out of. That will take years to replace what they have already sent Ukraine. 250 anti-armor systems, Javelin missiles. And just remember, it is not, they're sending 250 Javelin missiles. That means 250 destroyed Russian tanks or vehicles. No, that's not the case. I've gone over this before also. The US Army admits trained US soldiers under training conditions usually hit a target at a rate of 19%. Untrained Ukrainians in combat is going to be much less than that. So it's far fewer than 250 hits. We're not even talking about whether the missile actually critically damages or destroys the tank. 2,000 anti-armor rockets. They don't say what kind, but if it's a man-portable anti-tank system, then again, it goes back to the 19% hit rate, and then an even lower kill rate. Claymore anti-personnel munitions. These are landmines meant to kill people. Demolition munitions. Cold weather gear, helmets, and other field equipment, which is kind of late to be sending that now, but I guess better late than never. Now, this next list, this is the list of contracts that the U.S. is drawing up with arms manufacturers that will be fulfilled and then sent to Ukraine. So these are going to take a lot longer to get to Ukraine, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that. First, two Hawk air defense firing units. And these are not actually going to be manufactured, they're going to be refurbished. This is an anti-air system that the US itself has not used for over 20 years. Anti-aircraft guns and ammunition, there's no specific details given. Equipment to integrate Western air defense launcher missiles and radars with Ukraine's air defense systems, or whatever's left of them. That's worded in a very open-ended way. Is this a solution they already have, but they just need to get people together to implement it, or do they have to create the solution first and then implement it? So this could take quite a while. This is something we have to keep an eye on. There might be an Eastern European NATO member that has Soviet-era air defense systems and also Western air defense systems that they've already integrated together, and maybe that could provide a starting point for this item on the list. Equipment to sustain Ukraine's existing air defense capabilities. Again, what are they talking about? Are they talking about machining or otherwise manufacturing parts for Ukraine's existing Soviet-era air defense systems? They don't say. Air defense generators, counter unmanned aerial systems, and then they say 4 air surveillance radars. And Ukraine had these type of radars. It's part of their air defense network. Clearly they've been destroyed or they've broken down. Now the US wants to provide them with 4 more. Then it says 20 counter mortar radars. This is the AN-TPQ-50. It is mounted on the back of a Humvee. Let me show you what it looks like real quick. It looks like that. That is the radar, the generator, and associated equipment. This is part of counter battery radar, and you use this to find where incoming enemy rounds are coming from, and so you can direct your artillery at that position, destroy an enemy artillery position. Now, in recent weeks, I've seen the Russian Ministry of Defense announce the destruction of multiple counter battery radar systems sent by the US to Ukraine very frequently, almost daily. And I'm not really sure how many the US sent in total, but at least there's one system that they sent 20 of, just to give you a ballpark idea of how many we're talking about. So these 20 that they're sending Ukraine, this is not to augment what they have. This is to replace what they've lost. Going back to this article here from the United States Army Acquisition Support Center, they're talking about their own counter mortar radar system. It says the Q-50 can quickly detect, track, classify, and accurately determine the point of origin of enemy indirect fires and provide projectile impact locations with sufficient accuracy to warn soldiers and provide point of origin information for engagement for your artillery to hit them. Radar systems are fairly sophisticated. It's going to take a while to build 20 of them. How long? The TPQ-50 is made by SRC Tech. It's based in Syracuse, New York. There's this article. SRC Tech to build counter-fire radar to protect Ukraine from rocket, artillery, and mortar threats. It says officials of the Army Contracting Command at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, has announced a $12.1 million order to SRC Tech in late September for TPQ-50 radar systems as part of the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. So this process of drawing up contracts, building it, and sending it to Ukraine. And they're talking about, I believe, this one from September 15th last year, 4 counter artillery radars. So how long is it going to take this company in Syracuse, New York to make 4 of these radars? It says on this contract modification, SRC Tech will do the work in Syracuse, New York, and should be finished by June 2023. So that's about this article is from last year. It's about 7 or 8 months to build 4. They'll be ready by June of this year at the earliest. Now they've ordered 20 more. So how long is that going to take? I'm thinking quite a while, a year or more. Just to give you an idea of what these contracts in reality are actually about. A lot of these weapon systems are not going to be available to Ukraine for quite a while. Next on the list, spare parts for counter-artillery radars, or whatever's left of them. The Puma unmanned aerial system. This is very similar to the Russian Orlan 10. It is used for observation for artillery. And this is one of the more useful items that they've given Ukraine. They can use these drones to spot Russian targets and direct artillery fire toward them, including with the GPS-guided Excalibur rounds. The problem is, it's not that these systems are ineffective. They work. They're effective weapon systems. They're just not necessarily optimized for this type of conflict like Russian equipment is, and they're not available in the quantities, nor is the ammunition for them available in the quantities necessary to match Russian firepower. Next on the list is precision guided rockets. So they're talking about the ground launch small diameter bomb. This is a rocket with a guided bomb attached to it. The rocket fires it up into the air, and then it separates and the bomb glides to the target, and it's guided. It has a range of supposedly 150 kilometers. We don't know because that hasn't been used in combat yet. And that's a little bit further than the Russian Tornado S guided rocket system. That has a range of 120 kilometers, but it falls far short of the Russian Iskander missile system, which has a 400 to 500 kilometer range. And then, of course, Russia has its cruise missiles, Garan 2 drones, and all of its military aviation. Now, the problem, and that sounds great. So now they have these ground-launched small diameter bombs that they can launch at Russian targets. It has a much further range than the guided rockets the HIMARS has been firing in Ukraine, which is about 70 to 80 kilometers. The only problem is it's on this list. It's on the second list, not the list of things that the US has in its stockpiles. It's on the list of things that still need to be made. So we have this article from the New York Times. US sends longer range weapons. Latest aid package will allow Ukraine to hit targets 90 miles away. 90 miles, 150 kilometers. It says the ground launched small diameter bomb uses a rocket motor to boost a 250-pound munition into the air, where it deploys scissor-like wings and glides to its target, guided by satellites. Developed by Boeing and Saab, the weapon is brand new and has not been fielded by the US military. So this is something they are rushing to Ukraine that has just been developed. And it also says the new rockets, like the Abrams tanks announced last month, will most likely not be delivered for several months, if not years. Still, the pledges signal to Russia that Ukraine's military will eventually be equipped with tanks and other advanced weaponry that would enable it to mount counteroffensives to take back territory seized by Moscow, which goes back to my observation that a lot of this looks like posturing and bluff more than actual practical aid to Ukraine. It also sounds like a very good excuse for Russia to continue pressing on, because it knows that Ukraine is a problem. That is why they've gone into Ukraine in the first place, and the US is just going to give them more and more weapons. So they need to solve the Ukraine problem. This is ensuring that they cannot leave it unsolved. We have this article from Reuters. Analysis: Ukraine's new weapon will force a Russian shift. And it says, it is not yet compatible with HIMARS, but the United States will provide Ukraine new launchers for the rockets, said sources. The ground-launched small-diameter bomb could be delivered as early as spring 2023, according to a document reviewed by Reuters. And the shift that they're talking about is Russia having to adjust their supply lines, their depots, their command and control centers. Just like they did with HIMARS, they'll just have to do it out to a further range. And I'm sure that Russia has a contingency plan for this, because this was announced last year. And I'm sure that they have a contingency plan for ATACMS, which has a range of 300 kilometers. This capability that Ukraine may or may not get, this is not a capability that Russia doesn't already have in abundance. And then there's this older Reuters article. This is from November last year. Exclusive: US weighs sending 100-mile strike weapon to Ukraine. And it says, although arms manufacturers are struggling with demand, those factors make it possible to yield weapons by 2023. So they're talking about the process of making this, albeit at a low rate of production. So it's going to take a while for them to make them. And when they do start making them, they'll be made in very small numbers, which leaves Ukraine with the exact same problem it has with absolutely everything else. The West's military-industrial output cannot keep up with the demands that Ukraine has. And the demands Ukraine has is to be able to fight Russia and lose at this current rate and not faster. This is the problem that Ukraine has. And then also on the list are secure communications equipment, medical supplies, funding for training, maintenance, and sustainment. So the US and its allies, they had been threatening Russia and escalating with Russia by sending all kinds of weapons, larger and larger amounts of weapons and a larger variety of weapons to Ukraine, weapons they had on hand and were just transferring to Ukraine. Now, more and more of these pledges, these threats, this escalation involves weapon systems that don't even exist yet. And this illustrates the diminished military-industrial capacity of the United States and its allies. And I've heard people say that this is going to diminish the West's military fighting capacity if and when it ends up fighting China. The US is trying to provoke a war with China, particularly over Taiwan. And that is generally true. But one thing I want to point out is that a lot of the weapons the US is sending to Ukraine are not weapons they will be using in any potential conflict with China, especially over Taiwan. That conflict will be fought primarily with the Navy and the Air Force, and with missiles, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, air-to-air missiles, tanks, anti-tank weapons, even HIMARS. Really, to a certain extent, wouldn't make any real difference in a fight with China. The HIMARS potentially, because the US Marines are supposed to use them to hop from one island to the next and target Chinese shipping. But I want to show you this. From military.com, Marines fire anti-ship missile from back of unmanned truck to hit a target at sea. It says the Marine Corps has combined two existing technologies to produce a deadly new way to hit targets offshore, coined Nemesis. The Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System can launch naval strike missiles from the back of a modified joint light tactical vehicle to destroy targets on land or at sea. Raytheon Missiles and Defense, which makes the naval strike missile, announced Wednesday that the Marine Corps used Nemesis to hit a target in the water from Point Muga Sea Range in California. The missile can take out targets from more than 100 nautical miles away. That is 185 kilometers. So that's much further than the guided rockets that the US is sending to Ukraine. Is less than the 300-kilometer range of the ATACMS. So that could be a potential reason they don't want to send the ATACMS to Ukraine. They would prefer that they be used by the US Marines when they provoke a war with China. But ultimately, the US feels that it can burn through its land-based weapons in Ukraine because it's going to use its air power and naval power for whatever it is that they provoke with China. This is how they're trying to solve this two-front war that they're getting themselves involved in, using land power for one and air and naval power for the other. Now let's talk a little bit more about these Western main battle tank deliveries, and let's talk about Germany specifically. So first we have this article. Germany confirms it will provide Ukraine with Leopard 2 tanks. Down here it says Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced the decision to send 14 tanks and allow other countries to send theirs too at a cabinet meeting on Wednesday. And they're talking about Leopard 2 tanks. Okay. And then we have this from Politico. Germany to send 88 Leopard 1 tanks to Ukraine. Now, I've already talked about the limitations of the Leopard 2 tank, all of the reasons Ukraine will not be able to use them effectively, and even if they do use them effectively, they have performed no better in modern warfare than the T-72s that they already had and were familiar with and could sustain on the battlefield. And before I start talking about the Leopard 1, I just want to point out that they're sending 14 Leopard 2 tanks and 88 Leopard 1 tanks. 14 of one kind of tank, 88 of another kind of tank. And this is the Anti-Defamation League. This is a US-based human rights organization, and they have a whole entry for the number 1488. 14 Leopard 2 tanks, 88 Leopard 1 tanks. It says 1488 is a combination of two popular white supremacist numeric symbols. The first symbol is 14, which is shorthand for the 14 words slogan, "We must secure the existence of our people and the future for white children." The second is 88, which stands for Hail Hitler, H being the 8th letter of the alphabet. Together, the numbers form a general endorsement of white supremacy and its beliefs. As such, they are ubiquitous within the white supremacist movement as graffiti and graphics and tattoos, even in screen names and email addresses, and even in the quantities of tanks Germany wants to send to Ukraine. Germany, the successors of Nazi Germany, sending 14 Leopard 2 tanks, 88 Leopard 1 tanks to Ukraine. So it's military, which includes a significant component of actual Nazis for them to use on the battlefield against Russia. So when people ask me, Brian, why did Russia have to go into Ukraine? This is the reason why. Why doesn't Russia just negotiate with Ukraine and the West, with NATO? They're reasonable. They're not reasonable. Germany knows this. The West knows this. They know what 1488 is. That Germany has laws about this, and they could have broken these tank announcements, the numbers up into different amounts. They could have subtracted a tank, added a tank, but no, had to be 14 Leopard 2 tanks, 88 Leopard 1 tanks. That is not an accident, and this is why Russia and China cannot talk with the US and its allies. This is why they cannot stop until the people currently driving Western foreign policy are unable to do so. This is the reason why. Now, let's talk about the Leopard 1 tank specifically. This is yet another tank, another vehicle on the battlefield that Ukraine is going to have to open an entire supply chain up for, because it uses all different spare parts. It even has a totally different gun. It has a 105 millimeter gun versus the 125 millimeter gun you'll find on the T-72, T-82, T-90, and the 120 millimeter gun you'll find on most Western main battle tanks. The armor on the Leopard 1, I mean, this is a tank that was developed after World War II, in the 1950s. It is not going to stop a modern tank shell. It is not going to stop a modern anti-tank guided missile. It will not stop an RPG. There are probably even guns like the 100 millimeter gun on the BMP-3 that will punch a hole through the armor on the Leopard 1. And unless the fire control is extensively upgraded, That's going to be a problem. And the weight is significantly different than Leopard 2, Challenger 2, and the M1A2 Abrams. It's much lighter. It's about as light as a T-72 tank, which actually gives it an advantage in terms of mobility. Now, the Leopard 1 and the French AMX-10 RCs that are being sent to Ukraine, they're calling them tanks, but they are not really tanks. You cannot use them in the tank role. The tank on a modern battlefield has to be a heavily armored breakthrough offensive weapon. The Leopard 1, the French AMX-10 RC, they don't stand a chance in that role. What they could and should be used for instead is as assault guns. And an assault gun is basically just a mobile gun platform that has protection against small arm fire, has a large gun, a 105 millimeter gun qualifies as large, and it moves with the infantry call it in, and it fires on a position where they need additional firepower because the weapons the infantry carry is not sufficient. It could be used for that. The added bonus of using it that way is that you don't need to train the crews as tankers. There's a lot less demand on them in learning tactics, unit cohesion as part of a tank platoon or tank company or as a brigade. They just work with the infantry. The infantry call them in and they point the gun in the general direction. A while ago, we heard Russia was bringing up T-62s, these really old tanks, pretty much from the same era as the Leopard 1. And people were mocking Russia. They said this is an indicator that they're running out of tanks. And actually, no, that wasn't the case. They were using them as assault guns, and they were transferring these T-62 tanks to mobilized forces that did not really have the skill sets of a modern tank operator, and that's what they could be used for, and they would be very useful in that role. T-62s for Russia, Leopard 1s and French AMX-10 RCs for Ukraine. That would work. If they use them as actual tanks on the front line as breakthrough offensive weapons, they will just be destroyed. Like all of their other tanks, which is why they're sending these in the first place. And now just to put things in proper perspective, we remember the West mocking Russia for using the T-62 because it was so old and outdated. Let me just show you what they're doing with Leopard 1 tanks in places like, say, Canada. This is from Cold Lake Sun. Tanks that saved the day in Afghanistan to be used for target practice in Cold Lake. About 45 retired Canadian Army tanks, Leopard 1s, will soon be used for target practice at the Cold Lake Air Weapons Range. So we'll just have to wait and see how the Ukrainians actually use them on the battlefield. If it is to be used as a tank, that will be abysmal. And if the West is giving them these vehicles to use as tanks, that is an indicator that the West either doesn't have the ability or doesn't have the will to give Ukraine what they need just to maintain the pace they're losing at right now. One last note, I want to talk about the Chinese balloon that the US Air Force shot down after saying they couldn't shoot it down because it would endanger people. But then they did it anyway. Alex Christoforou of the Duran, he did an excellent video talking about this. And he was talking about the utterly deranged narratives that sprung up on all sides of the political spectrum in the United States regarding this balloon. So I will put the link to that video down in the video description below. But I just want to add this. This balloon incident is to China what Russiagate was to Russia. This is a very deliberate stepping stone the US is putting in place to get the public moving in the direction toward war with China, just as they did with Russiagate, moving the public toward war with Russia or proxy war with Russia in Ukraine. Now they're doing the exact same thing with China. They even claim that this has happened before, but do we remember hysteria like this ever occurring before? No. We don't. They made a very deliberate choice to create hysteria, fear, anger, hatred, and to point people in the direction of war. We have to do everything we can to wake people up so that they don't go and sleepwalk into another war, this time with China. Now, even if you want to believe that this was a Chinese spy balloon, because for some reason all the military satellites that China has an extensive space program. They have their own space station. If you track year to year the number of satellite launches that they launch versus the US, it's a very comparable number. If you want to believe that somehow this was a spy balloon and this is a big violation of US sovereignty, let me just point this out to you. Let's go to the US State Department's own official website, US Relations with Taiwan, and let's scroll down to where it blatantly says, we do not support Taiwan independence. They have a long-standing One China policy. One China policy means there's only one China. Taiwan is a part of it. There's only one government of China. It is the People's Republic of China, based in Beijing. This is what the United States officially agrees to. And then they send their politicians to Taiwan, despite Beijing saying, we didn't authorize that. That is a violation of Chinese sovereignty. They ship weapons to Taiwan. They pour millions of dollars into the local politics of Taiwan every single year to build up the Democratic Progressive Party, which is in power right now, to encourage separatism in Taiwan right now. That is a violation of Chinese sovereignty. We're still, I don't know if people remember this from 2021. This is Voice of America, US government-funded media. US nearly doubled military personnel stationed in Taiwan this year. Well, they're not guarding the embassy because the US doesn't have an embassy in Taiwan because Taiwan is not a country. So what are these troops doing? And the article, it doesn't mention it, but it says the increase from 20 to 39 between December 31st and September 30th came with little fanfare, but it did coincide with a rare public acknowledgement by President Tsai Ing-wen in October that the US military maintains a small presence in Taiwan. Could you imagine, people, look at the reaction across America of a weather balloon, potentially a spy balloon. Imagine if China was clandestinely placing Chinese troops in, say, Puerto Rico. Just think about if it was the other way around. Would it seem as reasonable as a lot of people seem to think that the current US, not policy toward Taiwan, is unreasonable? It is reasonable. It is their actions that contradict that official policy. So this is something that we're going to have to keep a close eye on. Right now, we're covering the US proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. And at the same time, we're watching the US take very deliberate steps toward war with China. Very dangerous times. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Also, all of the links that I referenced in this video, they will be in the video description below, as will be ways you can help support my work. I don't monetize my YouTube channel. If you see an ad, feel free to block it or skip it because it's not helping me at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's one-time donations, month to month, or even if you're just helping share my work with others, sending news tips, putting kind comments in the comment section below, thank you so much. That helps. That's what makes this all possible. And as always, thank you for watching.